My name is Captain Tariq bin Salman Al-Harthy, and on June 4th, 2022, I lost everything a man born in Saudi Arabia is taught to protect with his life. My career in the Royal Saudi Air Force, my honor, my nationality, my family's name, and even the right to step on the soil where I was raised. I did not lose them in war. I did not lose them through betrayal or political scandal. I lost them because of a single sentence I shouted inside a dying aircraft as it dropped through the moment those words left my mouth. Desert below, I knew something irreversible. That sentence was, Jesus, there was 38 soldiers behind me, strapped into their seats as the aircraft shook like an animal trying to break free. My co-pilot was screaming over the alarms, the cockpit lights were flickering out one by one, and every warning system we had was exploding into red. I was a man trained to remain calm no matter what, but in that moment, with the altimeter spinning downward and the aircraft falling faster than any checklist could keep up with, there was no calm left inside me. Only a wild, raw instinct that came from somewhere beyond myself. Saudi Arabia called me a blasphemer the next day. The Air Force declared me mentally unstable. The religious court summoned my family and asked them whether I had shown signs of apostasy before this incident. Newspapers ran headlines calling me the pilot who called the Christian God. Some called me a traitor to Islam. Some called me a liar who invented a miracle to save face. They stripped my rank, erased my record, erased the medals my father had been so proud of, and erased my name from the Air Force roster as if I had never served a day. But none of that was the real reason they wanted to bury my story. The real reason was this: 38 men survived a crash they should have died in, and every single one of them heard me call out to Jesus in the final seconds before the aircraft stabilized. I had spent my entire life believing skill was the only thing that mattered. I believed discipline could fix anything, training could overcome anything, and that a man was responsible for every victory and every failure in his life. That night destroyed that belief, because in the moment the aircraft was about to tear itself apart, when the panels were shaking loose and the engines were coughing out flames, when gravity was pulling us down faster than we could think, skill meant nothing, training meant nothing, my rank meant nothing. Only that desperate prayer remained, hanging in the dark cockpit like a spark. When the government investigators questioned me, they demanded, "Why did you say his name? Why Jesus?" They expected fear. They expected hesitation. But all I could think about was the moment right before the aircraft steadied itself, right before the lights came back, right before the systems flickered into life long enough to guide us toward the flat stretch of desert where we crash-landed and lived. I remembered the terror, the absolute certainty that we were seconds from death, and the strange quiet that had wrapped itself around me right before I opened my mouth and called out to the God I had never believed in. I remembered feeling a presence, not a hallucination, not the adrenaline, but something deeper, something that cut through panic like a blade through smoke. Investigators don't want to hear about presence. They want numbers, they want logic, they want a mechanical explanation. There wasn't one. And that terrified them more than the idea of a failed pilot. A failed pilot they could punish, a miracle they could not. I was born into one of the most honor-bound cultures in the world, a place where a man's word is tied to his bloodline. Every part of my life was built around loyalty, to my father, to my tribe, to the royal family, to the kingdom, and to the faith of my ancestors. But nothing in my upbringing prepared me for the moment when I watched death approaching through the windshield and realized I had no power to stop it. Nothing prepared me for the moment when my voice broke and I called out to a name forbidden in my country. And nothing prepared me for the moment after, when the impossible happened. This is the story of how a loyal Saudi Air Force captain became an exile, not because he failed, but because he lived, and because he dared say aloud the name of the one who saved him. I was born in Medina, a city where faith hangs in the air as tangibly as the desert heat, where the call to prayer rises like a tide 5 times a day and washes over everything: markets, military bases, schools, and the quiet neighborhoods where families, like mine, preserve generations of discipline. My earliest memories are not of toys or games, but of the sound of leather boots striking the tiled floor as my father walked through our house, his posture straight as a blade, his uniform always crisp. He was a colonel in the Royal Saudi Air Force, a man who believed that fear was a weakness and hesitation was sin. My mother was as devoted as he was, though to different rules. She taught Quran to neighborhood children and believed every action we took was witnessed, measured, and recorded by Allah. Between the two of them, my life had no space for mistakes. Perfection wasn't a goal, it was survival. And yet, even as a child, I sensed I didn't fit into the strict lines they drew. I respected my father, but I didn't want to be like him. I wanted something different, something higher. While other boys played football in the narrow alleyways or chased each other around the date palms near our home, I would slip away to the airbase fence and press my face to the metal wires, watching the fighter jets roar into the sky like living thunder. The heat from their engines made the air shimmer, and every time I saw them rise, slicing upward with impossible ease, something in my chest tightened, not in fear, but in longing. I didn't know the word for it then, but now I would call it hunger. Hunger for freedom. Hunger for something beyond the sand and rules and ceilings that pressed down on us. At age 14, my father finally brought me onto the base during a family open day. It was meant to be a reward for my good grades and discipline, but for me it was a revelation. I remember the metallic scent of jet fuel, the smooth, cold surface of the aircraft wings beneath my fingertips, the way the ground vibrated when a fighter engine powered up. A pilot in a dark green flight suit let me sit inside the cockpit of an F-15 for the first time. I stared at the maze of controls, the digital displays, the oxygen hoses, the seat harness. Every detail felt like a doorway into another world. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the moment over and over, the weight of the helmet on my head, the view from inside the canopy. In a house where everything felt predetermined and strict, that cockpit was the first place I ever felt limitless. By 16, I trained my body with a focus most boys my age didn't understand. I woke before dawn to run on the hot pavement, pushed myself through sand drills, forced my lungs to grow stronger, my reflexes faster. If I wanted to fly, I needed to be chosen, and only the best were chosen. My father rarely praised me, but I could see a change in his eyes, an approval he never said aloud, but carried in the firmness of his nods. He wanted me to follow his footsteps, but he also feared I would never be good enough for the Air Force. Every achievement I made seemed to surprise him. At 18, I applied to the King Faisal Air Academy. I will never forget the day the acceptance letter arrived. My hands trembled as I held it. For the first time in my life, my father clasped my shoulder and said, "Do not shame our name. Do not break." It wasn't affection, but it was the closest he had ever come to it. My mother cried quietly, thanking Allah for guiding my path. I didn't say it out loud, but I thanked no one. I believed I had earned it through my own strength alone. The academy was harder than anything I had imagined. The heat, the pressure, the competitiveness. It stripped away boys and revealed who had the spirit to survive. Many quit within weeks. I stayed. I excelled in ground school, in navigation, in meteorology. But where I truly stood out was physical training. I endured G-force drills that pushed others to blackout. I maneuvered training jets through turbulent winds with a calm I didn't know I possessed. Instructors began to look at me differently, not as a recruit, but as someone destined for more. 3 years later, I advanced into tactical flight training. That stage separated pilots from those who merely wanted to fly. We trained in night operations, emergency landings, desert survival, and high-altitude maneuvers. I learned how to read the slightest vibration of an engine, the faintest flicker of a gauge, how to anticipate danger before it appeared. The cockpit became home, the only place where I felt like myself. On the ground, I was Colonel Salman's son, the product of tradition and expectation. In the air, I was simply Tariq, the man who could outrun the wind. At 25, I earned my place among the elite. My family received invitations to ceremonies. My father, for once, looked proud. My tribe called me the Rising Falcon. Even the royal family acknowledged my performance. A marriage arrangement with a distant relative of a prince was quietly proposed, something considered a great honor in our society. I had everything a Saudi man could hope for: respect, stability, prestige, and a clear future. But in the quiet moments between missions, I sometimes felt something strange, like an emptiness just out of reach. I ignored it. Men like me were not allowed to feel emptiness. We filled it with work, duty, precision. If something felt wrong, we pushed harder. If something felt missing, we flew higher. That was the unspoken rule. For years, I believed the sky belonged to me. I believed that I had built my life with my own hands, that my talent, discipline, and willpower were the foundation of everything I had achieved. I believed nothing could break me. I was wrong. The night everything changed, the night the aircraft began its silent descent toward death, would reveal a truth I had never allowed myself to consider. That the sky I loved so much, the sky I thought I controlled, could swallow me whole in an instant. And the only thing strong enough to reach me there was not skill, not rank, not discipline, but something I had never believed in. The night of June 4th, 2022 began like any other training mission, the kind I had flown so many times that the routine felt engraved into my bones. The desert air around the Tariq region was cooler than usual, touched by a thin veil of wind that swept sand across the runway like soft whispers. The hangar lights cast long shadows across the tarmac as 38 soldiers boarded the aircraft behind me, each carrying heavy gear and heavier silence. They trusted us. They trusted me. I had flown transport missions countless times, even more dangerous ones, but that night felt strangely still, like the air was holding its breath. I walked around the aircraft performing my pre-flight inspection, running my gloved fingers along the fuselage, checking panel locks, hydraulic lines, landing gear, engine intakes. Everything looked perfect. Every screw, every wire, every panel reflected the precision our maintenance crews were known for. When I climbed into the cockpit, the familiar smell of worn leather, metal, and electronics greeted me like an old brother in arms. I strapped myself into the seat, adjusted my harness, and powered up the instrument panel. The cockpit glowed with a constellation of screens and gauges, each one waking up in soft blues and greens. My co-pilot, Lieutenant Omar, settled into his seat beside me. He was younger, eager, and always tried to hide the fact that he admired me more than he should. He joked often during missions, but tonight he was quiet. We began our checklist: fuel levels, engine thrust calibration, hydraulics, APU start, avionics, cabin pressure. I called out the items, he confirmed each one. Everything responded exactly as it should. There wasn't a single reason to anticipate what was coming. When we taxied onto the runway and pushed the throttles forward for takeoff, the engines roared like two beasts awakening. The aircraft surged ahead, shaking slightly as it gained speed. I lifted us off the ground, and the city lights of Tariq dwindled behind us until they looked like scattered embers. Soon we were swallowed by darkness, the silent, endless sky of the Saudi night. Below us stretched only the desert, vast and indifferent. At 7,000 feet, something subtle caught my attention. The cabin pressure indicator flickered, not enough to trigger an alarm, just one uneven pulse of light. I leaned slightly closer and watched it settle back into normal range. I told myself it was nothing. Instruments glitch all the time. A flicker, a split-second anomaly. But then another sensation reached me, something that wasn't visual, a faint metallic smell, like overheated wiring. It disappeared before I could locate it. "Did you smell that?" I asked. Omar sniffed the air, shook his head. "Nothing, sir. I didn't insist. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just the metallic tang of the oxygen system." But something inside me stirred, like an instinct trying to warn me through a closed door. 15 minutes later, the aircraft trembled, just a small vibration, almost like turbulence, except the sky was perfectly calm. Then a soft clicking sound tapped against the right panel. It stopped when I looked toward it. Again, nothing out of place, nothing broken, nothing unusual. But I had flown long enough to know when a machine was speaking to me, telling me something wasn't right. We maintained cruising altitude. The soldiers behind us were chatting among themselves, their voices muffled through the cockpit door. None of them sensed the tension curling slowly in my chest. At 9,000 feet, the radar blinked twice, momentarily losing contact with our surroundings. It came back almost instantly. Omar frowned at it but said nothing. I made a note to have maintenance check the wiring once we landed. Still, there was no danger, no real sign of failure, just little things, small echoes of something larger, a whisper before the scream. 20 minutes into the flight, the first true anomaly hit. The hydraulic pressure in System A dropped by 10%. Not enough to cripple us, but enough to feel. The control column stiffened slightly. I ran diagnostics. Everything reported normal, but I could feel the change, the way a pilot feels the slightest imbalance long before instruments admit it. Hydraulics are sluggish, I said. Omar checked his screen. Readouts are fine, they're not. He glanced at me, a little uncertain before nodding. Noted. The air felt thicker suddenly, as if the cockpit itself knew what was coming. Then came the second anomaly. A vibration started beneath our feet, small at first, then growing sharper. The engine gauges spiked for half a second, both engines, then stabilized. That kind of simultaneous spike wasn't normal, couldn't be normal. Something deep inside the aircraft was struggling, and yet, still no alarms. At 10,000 feet, the clicking sound returned, louder this time, followed by a tremor that shook the panels ever so slightly. Omar tapped the screen. Probably a software hiccup, he said, forcing a smile. But I could hear the fear edging into his voice. I radioed the base to report minor irregularities, just as protocol required. But before I could finish, the comms crackled into static. A surge of interference swallowed the signal and cut us off completely. Omar tried switching frequencies. Nothing. The radio was still technically on, but the sound was like sand sliding across metal. Something was interfering with our communication systems. Then the aircraft jerked, not a gentle dip, a sudden, violent lurch that pulled all 38 passengers against their harnesses. The flight deck rattled hard. The overhead panel buzzed with a rapid tremor, and for the first time that night, warning lights began to blink yellow. 1, then 3, then 5. Hydraulics B dropping, Omar shouted. The numbers on the screen plunged. Control response lagged. The aircraft began to drift left. I countered with the rudder. Too much resistance. It felt like pushing against a wall. Then something I had never seen before happened. The auxiliary power unit restarted on its own, completely uncommanded. Lights flickered, the cockpit shuddered, a high-pitched whine filled the air. A reset like that only occurred in catastrophic electrical faults. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. "We're losing stability," I said. The aircraft sank 500 feet in seconds. Warning chimes began to echo across the cockpit. Engine 1 overspeed, AP disconnect, hydraulic failure. A cascade of errors rolled through the screens like dominoes falling one after another. The machine I had trusted my whole life was unraveling in front of me, and I, Captain Tariq, the man who prided himself on being unshakable, felt fear claw its way up from the base of my spine. The cockpit lights dimmed. Outside the windshield, the desert spread out like a dark sea, the horizon disappearing in blackness. For a split second, everything went quiet, a stillness so unnatural it made my breath stop. Then the alarms exploded again, louder than before. Engine 1 coughed. The vibration turned into a deep pounding. Flames spit out from the exhaust. "Engine 1 is failing," Omar cried. I cut fuel flow to secure it, but the engine ignored my input and stuttered violently. Then, with a bang that shook the whole left side of the aircraft, Engine 1 went dead. Silence filled half the cockpit. The left side of our world went dark. We were losing altitude fast. The aircraft dipped, nose pulling downward despite my full effort to stabilize it. The yoke felt heavier, the pedals stiffer. Every part of the plane was sinking into a kind of mechanical paralysis. And yet, this was only the beginning, because in less than 10 minutes, the second engine would begin to fail. And the real fall, the fall that would push me past the edge of every belief I had ever held, was still waiting in the darkness below. The moment Engine 1 died, the aircraft lost the balance that had kept us steady through the night sky. It wasn't just a mechanical failure, it was like losing a limb. The left side dropped sharply, pulling us into an unwanted roll. I fought the controls, but the yoke felt like a weight pinned under concrete. Every movement took twice the effort for half the result. My muscles strained, my teeth clenched, my heartbeat thudded like a drumline inside my ears. The alarms blared so loudly that my skull vibrated with each warning tone. We were now descending at a rate no pilot ever wants to see while still in the air. Altitude 8,300 feet, 8,100, 7,900, 7,600. The ground began pulling us down like a magnet. Behind us I could hear shouts, first confused, then panicked. Soldiers who moments ago had been half asleep were now wide awake, gripping their armrests, praying under their breath, yelling questions no one could answer. They didn't know the aircraft's condition yet, but they could feel it. Anyone could feel it. Gravity had become a force with a personality, merciless, impatient, dragging us toward whatever fate waited in the desert below. Then the cockpit lights flickered again. A half-second pulse of darkness. But that was enough to send terror slicing through my spine. Systems that flicker under heavy load don't do it for no reason. They flicker when the heart of the aircraft is failing. Power is unstable, Omar whispered, his voice trembling. His fingers shook as he tried to run diagnostics. Before he could finish his sentence, the displays dimmed again. The desert outside the windshield stretched out like a giant black void. There was no moon, no city light, no horizon, only emptiness. Flying at night over the Arabian desert is like flying over the edge of the world. You see nothing, but you feel everything. And then Engine 2 coughed, just once. But that one cough felt like a death sentence. Altitude 7,000 feet. Come on, I muttered, adjusting throttle, trying to stabilize airflow. The engine coughed again, longer this time, followed by a sound I knew too well, a grinding roar, metal scraping, blades struggling, a wounded machine begging for mercy. No, stay with me, I said, as if the aircraft could hear me. But machines don't obey fear, they obey physics. The vibration intensified. My seat shook, the pedals rattled. The entire cockpit felt like it was trembling under the pressure of holding itself together. And then, bang! Engine 2 sputtered, choked, and lost more power. Warnings exploded across the control panel. Engine 2 thrust loss, HYD SysB crit, elec bus failure, autopilot offline. Omar grabbed the yoke with both hands. We're losing both engines. Captain, I know, I snapped, because fear was rising in me faster than the aircraft was falling. Altitude 6,500 feet, 6,200, 5,800. We were dropping like a stone. The noise behind us turned into raw terror. People were shouting prayers in Arabic, calling their mothers, crying out La ilaha illa Allah. The aircraft shuddered so violently that the overhead panel buzzed continuously like a swarm of angry insects inside the cockpit. And then it happened. The lights went out, not dimmed, not flickered, went out. We were thrown into perfect, suffocating darkness. Every system, electrical, navigational, instrumental, shut down in a single, catastrophic cascade. For a moment, the world ceased to exist. There was no cockpit, no switches, no gauges, no screens, only the roar of the wind and the hammer of my heartbeat inside the darkness. Captain! Omar's voice cracked. We're blind. I knew. Every pilot fears this moment, the moment when technology abandons you and the sky becomes a tomb. In that darkness, time stretched. A second felt like a minute. I could feel sweat running down my back, cold and thin. My hands trembled on the controls, not from effort, but from dread. All my years of training, discipline, and pride evaporated. Altitude, 5,200 feet, 4,900, 4,600. We were seconds away from losing aerodynamic control entirely. Behind us, chaos erupted. Soldiers were screaming, some praying loudly, some whispering final confessions. I heard someone retching, someone crying for his child, someone begging Allah to give him one more chance. The aircraft lurched again, the nose dipped. A violent downward pull yanked my stomach into my spine, 4,200 feet. I tried to regain some sense of stability, but with no instruments. A pilot is nothing but a frightened man in the dark. Then a single red light flickered faintly on the right side of the cockpit. Terrain. Terrain. Ground warning. The desert was rising to meet us. Terrain. Pull up. Terrain. Pull up. Omar grabbed my arm. We're going to crash. Captain, we're dead. Something broke inside me at that moment. Not physically, emotionally, psychologically. The hard, disciplined exterior I had built since childhood cracked open, and I felt small, smaller than I had ever felt. My life had always been about control. Control through strength, control through discipline, control through skill. But here, in this falling aircraft, I had no control at all. I was being dragged toward death by forces I couldn't command. 4,000 feet. The alarms became one long, shrill wail, a sound so sharp it felt like it was tearing the air open. 3,800 feet, 3,600, 3,400. Everything inside me screamed for help, but I had no one to call. Not my father's voice, not my training, not Allah. I felt the cold hand of fear wrap around my ribs, squeezing until I could barely breathe. Then something happened, a whisper, a thought that did not belong to me, calm, soft, clear, cutting through the noise like a beam of light. Call my name. I froze. 3,200 feet. The air around me suddenly felt different, slower, heavier, as if someone else had stepped into the cockpit. For a split second, the terror paused, only for a breath, only for a heartbeat. Call my name. I didn't understand it. I didn't believe it, but I felt it, an urging, a presence, something waiting for me to respond. Behind us, someone screamed. The aircraft tilted sharply to the right. Omar clung to the controls, his eyes wild with terror. 3,000 feet, 2,950. It felt like the entire world was collapsing inside the cockpit, and I was standing at the center of a whirlpool pulling me under. My throat tightened. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. I couldn't speak. Fear wrapped around my tongue like chains. The voice came again. Call my name. 2,900 feet. That was the moment, the exact moment, when everything inside me broke. Pride, discipline, control, the identity I had built my entire life, and something inside me surrendered. I didn't understand why. I didn't understand who was speaking, but I felt a truth deeper than reason. If I didn't call that name, every soul on this aircraft would die. So I inhaled once, shaking harder than I ever had in my life, and prepared to shout the most forbidden plea in Saudi airspace. I don't remember making a conscious decision. It felt more like something inside me cracked open, like a dam giving way under the pressure of fear and gravity and the weight of 38 souls hanging on my hands. One moment I was frozen, gripping the controls with knuckles white as bone, and the next, a voice tore out of me before I could stop it. Jesus Christ, save us! The words ripped through the cockpit, louder than the alarms, louder than the wind, louder than the chaos behind us. My own voice shocked me. It felt like hearing a stranger speak through my lungs. The moment the name left my mouth, everything inside the aircraft seemed to pause, just for a heartbeat. Omar turned to me as if I had stabbed him. His eyes widened, his lips trembled, his entire face contorted in disbelief. "Captain, what did you just... You can't..." His voice broke. Tariq, no. He wasn't afraid of the crash in that second. He was afraid of what I had said. Behind us, the soldiers went silent. Not because the aircraft had stabilized, it hadn't, but because every man in that cabin had heard the Saudi pilot in the cockpit call upon the Christian God. It was unthinkable. It was illegal. It was a betrayal of everything we had been taught since childhood. But their shock didn't change reality. We were still falling. Altitude, 2,850 feet. Jesus Christ, I whispered again, barely breathing, my eyes stinging with tears I hadn't realized were there. If you hear me, please, help us. That was when it happened. Not a flash of light, not an angel, not a booming voice from the sky. It was one small change, a sound, a click, soft, mechanical, precise. The kind of sound every pilot recognizes because we hear it hundreds of times during training. A relay reset, a circuit reconnecting. The right side auxiliary electrical bus flickered once, then came alive with a soft hum. The screens in front of me glowed faintly, just enough to reveal a ghostly blue attitude indicator. It wasn't full power, it wasn't even half, but it was something. Omar gasped. "Captain, the electrical bus, it's back." The attitude indicator stabilized, showing the real pitch of the aircraft for the first time in nearly a minute. My breath caught in my throat. I pushed forward on the yoke slightly, adjusting our angle by instinct, and for the first time since we began falling, the aircraft responded. Barely, weakly, but it responded. Then the second sign came. Engine 2, which had been sputtering like an old generator dying in the cold, gave a cough, a short, sharp kick, followed by a thin rise in RPM. Only 5%, then 8, then 10, not enough to fly, but enough to slow the fall. Altitude, 2,780 feet, the descent rate dropped from 13,000 feet per minute to 8,400. Still deadly, but survivable for a little longer. Behind us someone shouted, "It's stopping! We're slowing!" Another voice cried, "Allah has heard us," but I knew this wasn't a mechanical correction. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was intervening. Then impossibly a third change. A crosswind from the east, which had been pushing us sideways, suddenly shifted by just a few degrees, enough to align with our descent instead of resisting it. The yaw angle decreased, the side slip reduced, the aircraft's violent rolling steadied into a trembling wobble. "Wind shift?" Omar whispered. "No, that doesn't happen like this." He looked at the instruments, then at me. His disbelief was palpable. His eyes flickered with something I had never seen in them before. Not trust, not awe, but raw fear of the supernatural. Altitude, 2,700 feet. The cockpit lights grew a little brighter as the auxiliary bus stabilized. Half the screens remained dark, but the essential ones flickered with life. The artificial horizon, the airspeed tape, a partial altimeter reading. It felt like the plane was waking up from a coma. "Keep her nose up, just a little," Omar said, voice trembling. "I know," I whispered, pulling gently, guiding the aircraft with what little control remained. Outside the windshield, the desert was no longer a void. Faint shapes began to emerge, dunes, rocks, a darker patch of sand where the slope was flatter. I had no landing gear, no flaps, no thrust. But if we could angle the aircraft just right. Then another click. The hydraulic B system, which had been reading 0, spiked back to 3% pressure. That tiny pressure was enough to unfreeze the rudder, giving me minimal yaw control. I breathed out shakily. Okay, I can work with that." "You shouldn't be able to," Omar said under his breath. "None of this should be possible." Altitude, 2,500 feet, the falling slowed even more. 7,200 feet per minute, 6,800, 6,300, still too fast. But I had seen aircraft survive worse. Then came the moment I will remember until the day I die. For the first time since the descent began, the aircraft leveled, just slightly. The nose lifted 4 degrees. The attitude indicator settled into a fragile but stable line. I felt something in my chest. Relief, shock, awe, maybe all three. I whispered, "Thank you," and I meant it. Behind us, nearly 40 men broke into shouts, some praising Allah, some crying, some gasping in disbelief. Not one of them understood what had just happened, but every one of them knew it wasn't normal. Omar stared at me, his hand trembling over the throttle. "Captain, what did you do?" My voice felt foreign, shaken to its core. "I prayed," he blinked, mouth partly open. "To Jesus?" I nodded. The silence between us stretched a moment too long. But the aircraft didn't wait. It trembled violently again, reminding us that we were still in danger. Altitude, 2,300 feet. "Hold her steady," Omar cried. "I am." The desert floor approached fast. I scanned ahead for a landing area. Flat ground, no dunes, no rocks. Then I saw it, a stretch of hard-packed sand, maybe long enough to skid across without exploding. That was our only chance. I angled us toward it, fighting every vibration, every dip, every loss of altitude. "Brace," I shouted into the internal comms. "Brace for impact." Altitude, 2,100 feet, 1,900, 1,600. The cockpit rattled so violently I feared the nose wheel would rip off before we even touched the ground. Then, the final miracle. The descent rate dropped again. Not by much, just a little, just enough. 5,900 feet per minute, 5,200, 4,900. Still a crash, but no longer a fatal one. As the ground rushed toward us, I tightened my grip, steadied my breath, and whispered one last time, "Jesus, don't leave us now." And with that, we hit the desert. When the aircraft slammed into the desert, the impact tore the breath from my lungs. Metal screamed against sand, a grinding roar that shook every bone in my body. The left wing clipped a dune and ripped away like paper. Sparks exploded around us. The fuselage skidded, bounced, tore across the ground, and finally lurched to a violent stop. Silence followed. Not real silence, but the stunned, ringing kind that makes it feel like the world has paused to ask whether you're still alive. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hands were locked onto the controls. My chest felt crushed. My ears buzzed with the echo of alarms that no longer existed. Then sound returned all at once. Coughing, shouting, the desperate rasp of men pulling in air like they were waking from drowning. I checked myself, bleeding from the forehead, ribs aching, shoulders searing with pain, but alive. I looked to my right. Omar was conscious, crying without realizing it, his hands trembling violently. "We survived," he whispered, staring at nothing. "We survived." Behind us, every man was alive. Injured, shaken, bloodied, yes, but alive. I unbuckled and forced myself to stand, bracing against the tilted cockpit. When I opened the emergency hatch, cold desert air rushed in. Night had wrapped the world in darkness, but the sky above us glittered with stars so sharp they looked like needles piercing the black. "Everyone out, move!" I shouted. One by one, the soldiers staggered out of the broken aircraft, some limping, some supporting others, all stunned by the impossible fact that they were still breathing. I felt their eyes on me, not with gratitude, but with a fear they couldn't hide. They had all heard me pray. They had all heard the name I shouted in the cockpit, the name no Saudi soldier dares speak. Jesus Christ, save us. The miracle had not erased the cost. Hours later, military search crews found us. The moment they recognized, the commanding officer's jaw tightened. He did not congratulate me on saving the unit. He did not ask how I managed to land a dying aircraft without instruments or power. Instead, his first words were, "You will come with us, alone." They separated me from the others, escorted me to a transport vehicle, and flew me directly to a secure military facility in Riyadh. No explanation, no comfort, no recognition, just suspicion. Interrogation began the moment my feet touched the ground. At first, they questioned me like a pilot. What caused the failure? Why did the instruments die? How did I manage the landing? But soon the tone shifted. What did your co-pilot hear in the cockpit? What words did you shout during descent? What exactly did you say at 2,900 feet? Their eyes were colder now, calculating, accusatory. They weren't interested in the crash. They were interested in the forbidden name. I tried to keep my voice steady as they pressed me harder. "I was in shock," I said, "under extreme stress. I don't remember every word. It was a lie, and we all knew it." They brought in Omar the next morning. His face was pale, his eyes red. When they asked him if I prayed to Jesus, he hesitated, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. Then he said, "Yes." The room changed instantly. Everything in their expression snapped into certainty, into silent judgment. They dismissed him and kept me for hours, asking, accusing, pushing, trying to force a confession. "You abandoned Islam at 2,900 feet. Why? You committed blasphemy before witnesses. Why? You called on a Christian God. Why?" Every question struck like a blade. I had been trained my whole life to answer with strength, with control, with absolute discipline. But now the cracks inside me were too deep. I could feel them watching me the way my father used to watch, waiting for the smallest flicker of weakness to decide what punishment I deserved. At the end of the second day, they delivered their verdict. I was officially suspended, my wings revoked, my rank frozen, my credentials confiscated, my movements restricted until further notice. I was no longer Captain Tariq, the rising falcon of my family. I was a man under investigation for apostasy. My father visited once, standing rigidly behind the glass of the visitation room, his face carved from stone. "Whatever you did," he whispered, "you must deny it. You must fix this. Do you understand?" I looked at him, the man whose approval I had chased since childhood, the man whose shadow I had lived in, the man who taught me that strength was everything and emotion was weakness. And I realized something painfully simple. I didn't care about his approval anymore, because he wasn't there at 2,900 feet. He didn't hear the whisper. He didn't feel the presence in the cockpit. He didn't watch the aircraft come back to life when it should have been my coffin. I did. They released me after 2 weeks, quietly, without apology, and ordered me to remain silent about the crash. They treated the event like an embarrassment, a malfunction buried under paperwork. But there was one thing they couldn't bury: the miracle. Word spread through the barracks, through units, through officers' lounges. The men who survived began to talk, to each other, to their families, to anyone who would listen. They spoke about the impossible landing, about the instruments resurrecting, about the way death had passed over us in the desert, and they spoke about the prayer. Some called me delusional, some called me unstable, some called me a traitor, but a few, only a few, asked quietly, "What did you feel up there?" I didn't have the courage to answer at first, but one night, alone in my small living quarters, unable to sleep, unable to outrun the memory of that whisper, I opened a Bible someone had once gifted me and I never read. I turned to the first page my fingers touched. "Call on me in the day of trouble, I will deliver you." Psalm 50:15. I broke. All the walls I built, the pride, the discipline, the hardness, collapsed like a building struck at its foundation. I fell to my knees on the cold tile floor, rested my forehead against my hands and whispered, "You delivered me. I know it was you. I know no one else could have saved us. I'm yours. Whatever it costs, I'm yours." And peace, real peace, flooded me for the first time in my life. Not the peace of discipline, not the peace of control, but the peace of knowing I was held by someone stronger than the sky I had worshipped my entire life. If my story has reached you, if something inside your heart is stirring the way mine did, I want to ask you something simple. What will you call out when your life is falling from the sky? If this testimony has touched you, share it with someone who needs hope tonight. Like this video so more people can hear stories of deliverance, and subscribe for more real testimonies of what Jesus is still doing today. Because I should have died at 2,900 feet, but Jesus Christ met me in the darkness, and he has never let go.